Welcome back to Life in Stride podcast. This is episode 278. On this episode, we had Chris Chavez on the podcast. He is the founder of Citius Mag, one of the biggest running media outlets in the world. We got the Citius Mag origin story on this episode. We also heard about what's next. They are currently in the process of developing an app. Chris is also writing a book focused on the marathon that he gave us a little sneak preview about. We talked about his awesome journey to breaking 3 in the marathon. And we also talked about some fun topics. Is it okay to fun run the Boston Marathon? How do we make track more popular in the US? And some of the new world major marathons as well. We chatted about that. So hope you enjoyed the episode. If you do, please leave a review, drop a comment, share with a friend. We'll catch you on the next one. When we're running through Norton Commons or the Pewee Valley area in Louisville, Kentucky, it's pretty easy to spot Mason Construction Home. The attention to detail, the quality, the stunning design, you can't miss it. It stands out. We aren't just saying that either. Our own co-host Scotty trusted Mason Construction to build his forever home, and he and his family couldn't be happier. Don't tell Scotty this, but we're at his house a lot because we love the home. He's all right too, though. If you live in the Louisville or Southern Indiana area and are thinking about building your forever home or doing a remodel, there is nobody else to trust with this project than Mason Construction. The link to their website is in our show notes. Click on the request information option and start the conversation about what your forever home could look like. Are you commonly asked to go on other people's pods or no?
Every now and then, but, I think I get a ton of requests sometimes, and, like, I think we were just kinda talking before we started recording, I'll just sorta see where a show is at sometimes, and if it's, only been, like, 4 or 5 episodes and they're just growing their audience, sometimes I'll throw a bone to help that person kind of raise their profile, but then other times, I gotta be mindful of my own sort of time just handling, 1, recording and producing sort of my own show or some of the other shows that we've got with Citius Mag, and then tons of other elements of our coverage, running the business side of things, so I gotta be
Mm.
mindful of that before I jump on, too many podcasts, but if it was up to me, I would, yap about track and marathons and running all the time.
How many hours in a day do you dedicate to
I was gonna ask.
creating content versus running the business side of things?
Oh, that's a great question because I think it sort of depends on the time of year. Because as we draw closer to bigger events, I think I veer more on the content side of things. And then, I'll kind of forecast what our calendar looks like, what our big events will be, who we're looking to partner with around the major marathons, the world championships. We see what pre-existing partnerships and relationships we've got with sponsors and see who wants to re-up or run it back the following year. So I think towards the end of the year, sort of like that Q4 is where, I start to map out what the following year looks like. But then we'll have new brands and events and partners pop up all throughout, the year. And so I'm constantly jumping on calls with them to either familiarize those sponsors and brands with what Cydius does or look for the best fit for, plugging in with us and our audience.
Mm.
So, yeah, I guess I didn't really give a number of hours, but um, when I thought about when I made the jump of leaving Sports Illustrated, that was my 9 to 5 where I was like working on like the breaking news desk and manning a team of writers. So that was, 40 hours a week. And I always started thinking of just sort of like, all right, well, now if I strip that part of my job, because then it would be after that would be the time that I would dedicate to Cydius. Now I've opened up, 8 or 9 hours in a day to do some variation of, that entrepreneurial side versus like the content side. And I had to learn really quick, I guess, in the first 2 years of running Cydius, because I did go straight from being just a writer and editor to now just sort of running all of like the business ops with Cydius. So that was a learning curve for sure in the first couple years.
Who's
How
your
many?
first hire?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 2021 was a turning point for Cydius, especially during the pandemic, because I think that's when it made it easier for me to be able to do my Sports Illustrated job, and then at the same time have a laptop open on the side where I'd be able to do Citius Mag stuff, because we were no longer going into an office, and the content output started to go up a bit. That was also the time when we broadcast a couple of track meets through Trials of Miles. I don't know if you remember, but in February 2021 there was like this one meet out in Austin, Texas that it looked like everyone was gonna it looked like a diamond league at some points when we were announcing just sort of the lineup of athletes that were set to compete because everyone had this itch to get back to competing, yet we were still in the midst of the pandemic. And, we were reached out to by the Trials of Miles folks to see if they could leverage our channels to broadcast it. And then Kyle Merber and I decided to do the commentary. And after, I think it was 2 days of the meet, people really seemed to enjoy just sort of the rapport that we both had because we've been friends for so long. And that's sort of where the light bulb started to go off a little bit. It was like Kyle
Mm.
at that point had already started the lap count, and I was doing Citius, and he was getting ready to retire and move fully on to the track landscape or to just sort of the next step, I guess, and still wanted to stay involved in track, which is why he started the newsletter. And then I kind of realized I was like, we make a pretty good team. And so that's where, I think Kyle came on board. Mac Fleet was technically, I guess, like the first hire because
Yeah.
he popped into our broadcast booth at that Texas meet and then kind of shared with us a little bit of just his sort of appetite for broadcasting and or just sort of video production where he was self-taught. He's been self-taught. Anything you see from when we do our shows and stuff, that is Mac teaching himself just sort of how to run these graphics, how to run all these different cameras and set things up. And so it was really, really impressive. And before that, I think Mac was probably known for openly complaining on Twitter or like, I want to see, a quad box. I want to see, why is the clock going away at this point? Or this is maybe what we need to improve track broadcasts. And so it was a little bit of just like be the change you want to see in the world. And so the three of us, I think, from 2022 became just sort of like I guess, well, so Sidious has been my thing since 2017, but those two guys came on board and are now kind of partners in the whole thing.
When did you know that it was time to leave Sports Illustrated? Was that like a really hard move? Because I quit my job to do this, and I was there 6 years, and it was really hard to do leave benefits and all that stuff and take the
hmm
leap. It's paid off, but I'm curious, like, when did you know it was time to go full time with Sidious?
Yeah, so I enjoyed having it as just sort of like a passion project all throughout, 2017 to 2021, where it did start to make some money on the side, where you probably have felt the same thing, which sort of like now you have sponsors reaching out, you feel that there's an audience out there and people are enjoying the content. So you have a confidence that, all right, people, this is something that can sustain itself. But at the same time, how am I going to sustain myself and my family? And that's the trickiest part. And so from that time period, 2017 to 2021, it was just sort of just, money was coming in, but the expenses were super low. Occasionally we would try and, tap into it to get to a track meet here or there. But there was enough of a backing to be able to take this leap of faith. And I also started to see a little bit of the writing on the wall. I didn't get to go to the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. I was initially supposed to if it had taken place in 2020 when they cut back on the number of credentials that Sports Illustrated got. They got four, and I was like the fifth man. Um, so it was really kind of crushing. But what I decided to do instead was, one of our original podcasters, Dana Giordano, had her family has a house out in Martha's Vineyard, and it was the middle of the summer. We decided to go out there. Me, Kyle, and Dana would podcast every day of the Tokyo Olympics, just kind of, giving our thoughts, reactions to everything that was taking place. And so that was during those Tokyo Olympics, the Citius Mag podcast ended up climbing the Apple Podcast charts and the Spotify charts. And, I think it was so successful that I was like, okay, well, what if, yeah, people do seem to care what we have to say. And, I was kind of, I still was writing for Sports Illustrated through that entire time period, but I kind of also started to think 2022 is going to be a pretty pivotal moment for track with the World Championships coming to the US. The Sports Illustrated going to send me to that. And I kind of always, I'd been through one Olympic cycle from 2016 to 2020 already. And I knew how the mainstream sports media attention on track started to take a dip after an
Yeah.
Olympics. And so I kind of, saw that coming. So I said, you know what if I just leaned into Cydius full time and took this risk? And, it's paid off very early on. I think the brand saw some value in the type of coverage that we offered up. And so people wanted us at their events. And we slowly, I think, kind of became the hype guys
Yeah.
for track. And it's been really cool to see just sort of, that be embraced by, our audience, our readers, listeners, whatever it might be. And also just sort of, the brands and events that support us sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like, when you start Citius Mag, you have the flow tracks of the world, Let's Run, like some of these bigger media companies, but I think you guys did a great job standing out by like showing the athletes' stories maybe a bit more than those, like highlighting the athletes as individuals outside of the sport, or like getting to know them more on your podcast, interviewing them so well, having them on podcast after the meet, like day of the meet in Eugene or whatever. And I think that's what makes you guys stand out. Maybe why the success has been there for you guys is because you kind of took that route versus just having like normal kind of like journalist coverage. So I, awesome that you guys did that. Yeah.
We certainly lean into the personality side of things where I bring sort of that more reporter mix zone background of having done it
Yeah.
for, I think 13 years at this point or whatever it might be. And Kyle, Mac, Eric, Aisha, like they all bring the athlete perspective. And then we've also been able to tap younger voices that, kind of fit our tone and style. Who have just sort of that same passion for the sport, and that kind of shines through in the way that we talk about things. And um, yeah, you bring up sort of Eugene 2022, and that was a massive sort of gamble for us because again, I kind of looked at the 2022 World Championships as like this big moment, and maybe it didn't end up breaking through in the greater media landscape. Like three guys swept the medals in the 100 meters, but none of them ended up like on any nightly talk show or being
Yeah.
discussed just sort of on ESPN or anything like that. But for us, it was awesome that most of those athletes knew that, hey, I had this big moment on the track. Tomorrow I'm heading to the Citius Mag house, which was just a couple blocks from Hayward, to talk about, my experience. And, although you get these athletes in 5-minute doses, kind of through the iPhone camera post mix zone interview,
Yeah.
or 2 minutes on the NBC broadcast. We had them sit down with us for like 30 minutes at a time. And that was a grind.
Yeah.
We would start our mornings with a group run every day. Then we would go to the track for the morning session, come back in the middle of the two sessions to do 2 to 3 hours worth of interviews with crazy lineup of guests that
Yeah.
we would promote live on YouTube, no breaks, and then from there go to the evening session of track, and then come back and do a post meet show and repeat that over the span of 10 days. And that was one in particular that I had people consulting me, and I was like, well, this brand is offering us X amount of dollars to be able to do this out of their space, or at this house that was a little bit further out. And we turned down most sponsors for that 2022 World Championships because we wanted to lean heavier into, no, this is a Sidious moment. And really kind of anchoring ourselves that, hey, we're here to stay. And kind of that also made it comfortable for everyone to come in, whether you were a Nike athlete, Brooks athlete, Adidas athlete, whoever it was. Like, we had so many people from, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price, I think, walked in on the last day, and when we were live, we saw the numbers just sort of spike because no one in Jamaica had really seen her just sort of be that relaxed and cracking jokes for, a 30 to 40-minute sort of interview. And so, when I think, to some of the most pivotal moments in this early brief sort of history of Sidious, like 2022 World Champs is certainly, kind of on there.
Yeah, I remember watching all of those interviews, and I never really thought about how much time you guys were putting into it, in the
Mhm.
behind the scenes. So that must have been a crazy week, but I'm sure you saw like massive growth just over like one weekend of, going all in. So it must have been worth it in the end.
Yeah, and then it sets the bar for, like, the years to come. And I think, like, I'm a numbers junkie, kind of when it comes to the analytics of, how many people listen to an interview or watch a show or whatever it is. And, when it comes to world champs or Olympic trials or USA, it's like I always, set the goal. We got to top the previous year. And that means getting creative with the many different ways. Like, it's funny because like we've been working with New Balance around like the New Balance high school nationals over the last couple
Yeah.
of years. And we've been so lucky to have Quincy Wilson be this driving force of just attention where everything the kid does is gold. And, kind of the numbers spike and he, goes viral for anything that he does. And now we're sitting here being like, how are we gonna approach New Balance Nationals in 2027 when he's not in high school anymore? And so that's the fun part of my job is sort of that strategy side of things where it's like, all right, well, how do we lean heavier to speak to that high school demographic? Or when it comes to USAs or worlds, it's like, what else can we do to stand out in the space? And yeah, so that's where I still get to flex my creative muscle a little bit.
Dude, there is nothing that will grab an audience's attention more than a superstar high school athlete. If you think about like Mary Kane back in the day and
Yeah.
just tell me like Drew Hunter at his time too, like all eyes on them every single meet, so much media, being spoken about them. So yeah, that's hilarious about Quincy. But I mean, hopefully you guys can cover him in the NCAA, get some good coverage from that too. But it is pretty cool. Like he's going to Maryland, so that he's kind of got like the hometown hero story going for him. So I'm excited for him to run an NCAA. That'll be a cool storyline too, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, he's awesome. I wanted to talk a bit about like we had Jonathan Galt on recently, and we were talking about how like why running isn't as popular as it like we think it could be. And I'm curious to like maybe get your take on like maybe what could change or maybe why running isn't like track and field marathoning isn't like as popular because we're kind of comparing it to like golf where like, people will like watch Sunday at the Masters no problem. But like maybe why do you think running isn't as popular as like some of the other mainstream sports out there? Hey you. Yeah, you. It's 2026 and you're still buying your running supplies online instead of at your local running store. If you live in the Louisville, Kentucky area, there's nowhere else to buy your running supplies than Ken Combs Running Store on Shelbyville Road. They have everything you need from daily trainers to race day shoes, an assortment of different kinds of fuel, and apparel options. If you're a first time runner going to get your first pair of running shoes, this is the place to start. They will help you get the perfect type of running shoe for your foot so you're running comfortably and injury free. If you're a more experienced runner like myself and you want to go somewhere where they're going to have your old faithful running shoe, for me, that's my size 10 Nimbus or size 10 Triumph. I'm always going to Ken Combs for that. If you're looking to get plugged into the local community, Ken Combs has a Wednesday track workout for people of all different speeds, and they can also recommend many different groups in the Louisville area. If you're not from Louisville, visit We Run Lou. That's We Run LOU.com. We have a discount code in the show notes, and you can order from Ken Combs online and support an amazing local business.
Well, so
So
I
track
think we
and
have
field.
to separate, yeah, the two because marathoning is in a great spot right
It
now.
is,
It's
yeah.
it's super healthy. Every race is selling out. Now you've got London floating the idea of doing a 2-day event where they'd have 100,000, finishers, 50 on one day, 50 on the next day. Um,
Wow.
and that would no doubt like you'll be able to fill those spots with ease. The majors continue to expand. So the marathon and road racing, I think, is in a healthy spot. Actually, right now the problem is how do you keep up with the demand? And like you have to get
Mm.
like you look at what's happening here in New York City is like New York Roadrunners puts on all these awesome events all throughout the year. Every single weekend there seems to be like a New York Roadrunners race. But even like, I don't know, the local 4 miler sells out so quick. And, in the past, I would be able to sign up for that race maybe a couple weeks out. And now I've got to, think about where am I going to be in 6 months for this, 4 miler and then plan my whole life about like not leaving town for that weekend just because, I want to run in that race or, so that's where there's a big opportunity for events like Trials of Miles where they put on like these smaller races or like I think James McCurdy put on that smaller race out at Rockland County. Yeah,
I just
you were in it,
I
where
was there, yeah. Saw Kyle there.
yeah, and it's a great experience, sort of just like for the population of athletes who are going for fast
Yeah.
times or want to just get a race in. So that sort of next level of the sport is, also thriving for like the race organizers. Now, track is in a tough spot. Um,
Yeah.
and, I think the legacy of the 2022 World Championships, where it came to the United States, didn't end up, making as big of a splash as people thought it would. The
Yeah.
Paris Olympics were awesome in the sense that it was finally back to having like a thriving Olympics where, you had Tokyo, empty stands, no one was there. Before
Yeah.
that, Rio, same exact thing,
Empty.
sort of with the
Yeah.
stadium where it just, they had its kind of rough moments. But when people tune in and watch, 100 meters or whatever it is, the stands are crazy packed. And I was in that stadium and that was an awesome sort of time. But Paris was 80,000 people for morning sessions to watch repechage rounds, and then in
Yeah.
the evening, same exact sort of thing to catch all these finals. So the energy there was amazing. And now, kinda coming off of that, Tokyo, I think, was also awesome.
Mm.
So if you are in the know, right, within track, like you have these big moments and they're all great. But I think, there's a lot of attention coming up on LA 2028. It's going to be a home Olympics, but I just don't think that you can measure the success of track looking and feeling healthy by what LA 2028 is gonna look like because all Olympics, are gonna
Yeah.
have crazy packed stands. I think those tickets started going on sale yesterday and, the prices are already looking kinda crazy. So
Yeah.
if you're, Max Siegel or Seb Coe and you are standing at the LA Coliseum and you're looking at all these sold out seats and you think, "All right, we did it. Like we made track popular." I don't necessarily think that's the case. Now try and do that same thing with the World Championships at that same venue in 2029 or whatever it is, and you don't necessarily get the same exact result. So there
Yeah.
are just tons of I think the sport is fragmented in a lot of different ways, or it's hard to watch so many of these things, right? Like you run
Yeah.
into XYZ different sort of paywall for this event, that event. So the accessibility isn't ideal. Um, I also think that sort of like there's an educational component where sometimes things can get to be, I think, a little too complex for the
Yeah.
average sort of fan to understand. Um, there isn't a professional structure, a rest in peace Grand Slam track, but, like, it had
Yeah.
its shot at trying to professionalize the sport with a league sort of format, but so, like, there are attempts sort of to try and change it, but the powers that be in the establishment, I think, just continue to win out. Like, even the Diamond League is a good example. It's the premier series that track has, but you know, maybe globally, and if you're in Europe, you do like if you're in Europe and you go to one of those events, same sort of thing. Like they have sold, the Oslo Diamond League is sold out, and the stands are packed because there's tradition and history to that meet, and also it's you can market it year over year to the same exact population of people in Oslo or whatever it is, or in that area to be able to turn out to that event. London, same exact thing with 60,000 people for the London Diamond League. Um, so to start something new is tough, but then also, for the United States audience, I think is where this is that it a 2 o'clock meet on a Thursday isn't going to get much viewership. Let's be
Yeah.
honest, and I think that that's part of the reason why NBC was so okay with letting the rights to that go, because they
Mm.
probably looked under the hood and saw that the numbers to the, Lausanne Diamond League when it's broadcast at Friday at 2 p.m. is just a drop in the bucket, but since it was part of this bigger deal to have the US Championships and the World Championships and then the Olympics, then, it's just kinda like a throw-in. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different problems. We try and address them every single week, kind of in the lap count newsletter that we do. We kind of look at what just happened and see what's working, what's not. But yeah, I mean, this could end up being a Joe Rogan-esque podcast if we went just sort of, with
Yeah.
for 5 hours if we went line by line trying to address every single thing. But yeah, I'm not of one of those people that's of the belief though that like track will one day be as popular as like the NFL or MLB. It's kind of okay for it to be where it's at. The our mission at Citius, and this is kind of plastered all over, whether it's our website or our bio, is just to make it easier to be a
Yeah.
fan of the sport. And so that's why you look at some of our content and it provides ample context on who's competing, where to watch it, like why it matters, and uh, yeah, so that's sort of like the educational yet informative side of like everything that we do, and so we try, into our part in our
Mhm.
content's presentation, but yeah, it takes more than just us, I think.
I go ahead, Damien.
You mentioned an interesting point, and it's the time of day, right? The Boston Marathon starts at 10 a.m. on a Monday. Nobody's tuning into that. Like, unless you're a real running fan and you're working from home and you have it pulled up on the YouTube live stream or wherever you're watching it. So that's interesting. But I wanted to ask you about the news that came out today. And I think you posted it actually on Cydius, but the World Athletics launching the World Marathon Championships. Like, how
Yeah.
does that fold into kind of this discussion about like growing the sport as a whole?
Yeah, more inventory, right? Like we
Yeah.
just see just sort of like the demand for more sporting events. Like that's the one thing right now that is thriving, right? We have new leagues launching left and right in women's sports. You pickleball has seen just sort of like its
Yeah.
own sort of like professionalization, and sponsors are drawn to the whole entire thing. And now if you're World Athletics, look at what you got. You got the World Athletics Outdoor Championships, the indoor championships, the road running championships, um, like the now you've got the marathon championships, you've got a separate race walk championships. So you're telling me like if there's a race walk championships that this whole entire time, like I think the marathon, which is probably the most successful side of the sport, is going to be able to sustain itself. And so um, I kind of like it. I there are I would think there were signs that this was coming. You look at the marathon is contested at the World Championships, but what we end up having is these crazy, brutally hot races in
Mm.
Budapest and in Tokyo where
Yeah.
the athletes are melting, and there's always just a warning the day or two before. It's like we might have to change the start time. We might have to move it. In Doha, they were running at midnight, and it was like
That's
100.
crazy.
Even then, it was still like 100 degrees. So I like it from the sense that, hopefully what they're planning to do is tapping into already existing races. I think they said sort of Athens was probably going to be the first host city. So that means like maybe the 2030 Athens Marathon, which is in November, gets elevated to the status and they bring bigger stars. Because I think Kyle wrote about this in the lap count maybe 3 years ago, where if you're World Athletics, you should probably be looking at the World Marathon Majors as a competitor, uh, and because they're the ones that are drawing all of the top talent. The World Championships in Tokyo did have some really, really good marathoners, but you didn't have, the cream of the crop on the men's side when it came to, Kipchoge or, Sebastian Sawe, Jacob Kiplimo, because all these guys are taking bigger paydays to be at
You've
the fall or spring majors. And when you're running at a world championships, the biggest thing is that you're not getting an appearance fee for that whole thing. And sometimes your contract bonus doesn't even pay out as much as, the prize money that's at these majors. So that's the one obstacle I think that I'm curious to see how they're still going to try and tackle is the talent draw, because world championships, it does mean something. You have, a global gold medal. And on the women's side, credit to them in Tokyo, they did have some of the best, where it was Paris Chair, Tigges Assefa, some of the best in the world. But yeah, on the men's side, you can either go and run for six figures at the New York City Marathon or take zero appearance fee and risk it at a world championships right now. And like most people wouldn't make that gamble. So I like that, and then I hope that there's sort of like the incorporation of a race with the masses. If it's not already just sort of like the Athens Marathon being run on the following day or something like that. You maybe have the world ship marathon on Saturday, and then the masses run on the same course on Sunday. That would be pretty cool to see. I enjoyed running on the same course in Paris
Paris, yeah.
That
at
was
that
sick.
Olympics,
Yeah.
and that was awesome. To this day, I guess that's my last marathon. But then the next day, I get to just sort of talk to people about like, oh yeah, it really puts into perspective just how impressive Sifan Hassan or on the men's side, it was Tamarat Tola, I think,
Yeah,
climbing
yeah.
those hills
Hill monster.
were. And, if I had to walk it, and then you see just sort of even Connor Mantz's Strava shows that he's running 7 flat pace off of it, like it was that much of a monster. So I hope that there's that sort of side of things because then that helps sort of bridge the gap between the masses and the people who follow the elite side of the sport.
I was just watching, speaking of Paris, I went back to watch Clayton Young's video about the Paris Olympics, and I loved like Ed Eyestone. He always does those little like mantras. It was like something deploy, destroy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, I love this. So I don't know. I just thought I was just watching it. You were talking about the majors when they announced that Sydney was going to be added on as one of the majors. And they're talking about doing more. I think one in like Cape Town maybe, and then maybe some others.
Shanghai. Yeah.
Yeah, Shanghai. Yeah. At first, like, they added Sydney, I was like, "Man, like, it's too many, people aren't gonna do it, like, 6 is enough, whatever." And then, like, all of a sudden, all the people are flocking to Sydney to run Sydney. So it's like, if they have 10 or 12 of these bad boys, I think people are still gonna go. They're still gonna try to knock them all out in 1 year like people do. So I'm curious when they're gonna stop, but I really thought at first, wasn't like, people aren't gonna do this, it's too much, but people are doing it, so
It's gonna
I
hit
don't know.
9. So they're up to
Wow.
7 now, and Cape Town's next in line. Shanghai will follow soon after. So they've already sort of said that, if you complete Sydney right now, you don't necessarily get like a special 7-star medal. They're gonna
Okay.
wait to expand that mega medal to 9 when they add the 2 more sort of races. And I've done the 6 majors.
Yeah, you have it.
Sydney is one of those that, like, I haven't done yet, and neither is Cape Town or Shanghai. And at the moment, I don't necessarily have, interest in running them. I could be convinced. It's just, sort of just the time of year, the travel, but that's just me. Like, there are freaks out there who do all
Yeah.
6 in 1 year and then do it again the following year, and I'm like, 1, you realize how bad your carbon footprint is, but 2, it's a very expensive sort of, hobby, but, that's kind of marathoning. You look at the same sort of thing in Ironman triathlon. It comes down to how much you're willing to spend on your swimsuit, your bike, the shoes and all that kind of stuff. And the marathon can also sort of go, in that direction where you have people spending $500 on a pair of, super shoes that you can only wear once, right? For one, good for
Yeah.
only one marathon in hopes of
Yeah.
chasing a big PR. And so that means that there's going to be people who are out there willing to travel to these far places to run these marathons. And on the professional side of it, I do think that that's sort of where you run into a little bit of a problem because now you're spreading that, top 1% of marathoners across 9 different races.
Yeah.
And it
Mm.
when you look at the fields, it still already does look like it's the legacy marathons still end up drawing like the bigger and better fields. So it means so much more to win the Boston Marathon than the Sydney Marathon or
Yes.
the
Oh,
London
yeah.
Marathon versus the Shanghai Marathon. And that's going to take a while. And I don't really know if they'll ever just sort of, change sort of um, that, kind of like the meaning behind those races because yeah, Boston's the oldest in the United States, and then you got New York, which is the biggest and in the best city in the world, and so uh, yeah, so it means something to win the Cape Town Marathon, but maybe not as much as
Yeah.
winning New
Yeah.
York or Boston,
I
and
feel like adding
I
on
think the athletes know that too. Yeah.
they know that, yeah, and that's kind of the way I see it is it's a little bit of a watering down of the world
Hmm.
majors, by adding all these new majors that are, just like so rapidly too. But I wanted to ask you this question, Chris, on where you see, so marathon is thriving. I think we can all agree. Track not thriving as much. Do you think that more athletes like Grant Fisher, he just debuted in his half marathon in New York, are going to be going up to road racing up in distance?
He's
Do you think
testing the
that's going to be a
waters.
pattern that we'll see?
Yeah, and Connor Mance is kind of like the staple for and like the model
Yeah.
for what it could look like. Connor is still
Hmm.
dropping down onto the track and running the 10K at the pre-classic and running pretty well. I think everyone's
Yeah.
hoping to have just sort of that success. He took to the marathon a bit younger and then went on to have this amazing success to break the records. And with someone like Grant, it's sort of like that debut wasn't exactly what he wanted, but I'm not necessarily ready to cast him off and say like, "All right, no, just stay on the track." I think it was a good thing to, take to the roads while the iron is still hot on the track
Hmm.
where
Oh, he'll be
for
good. He's
yeah,
going to get good.
Yeah.
oh,
He'll be
he's gonna be
good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a while we would just kinda see the trend where it was very traditional to, you put in your time in the 5K. When you start to slow down, you go to the 10K. When you start to slow down there and time passes, then you make your marathon debut at 33, 34, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and you take a couple, big appearance fees and paychecks, 1 for your debut and 2 for, the next, 2 or 3 races, and then you see what you got, and you ride that for as long as possible. But now it's exciting to have people, Americans for sure, running the marathon, at 25, 26, 27, like whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Um, and it starts to follow through, I think, with what more of what we're seeing globally. I mean, look at Kenya, where most people are skipping the track entirely to
Yeah.
chase sort of the bigger paydays on the roads. In Japan, you have so many guys who run, 61 minutes
Sub
while in
210.
college
Yeah.
for the half marathon and then, test the full distance. And, the history of the marathon and what it means in Japan, is something that they definitely lean on. And so, we're taking cues, and I think America's finally catching up to just sort of the appeal to running a marathon while you still got some pop in your legs. And, of course,
Yeah.
shoes, the fueling, all these advances are also factors that go into just sort of making that successful jump. And there's a learning curve to the entire thing. Look at, and not even just Grant Fisher, but look at Joe Klecker. Like, wasn't an
Yeah.
instant sort of success when he ran his first half marathon, but then he comes around for his first marathon and he's able to put together like a 2:10, and I'm excited for what he's going to do in Boston. And so Charles Hicks, same exact way, NCAA cross country champ, now going to be running the Boston Marathon. I'm looking at his Strava being like, this is really impressive. But then
Yeah.
what's it look like on sort of race day? And yeah, it's not too early to get excited about the 2028 US Olympic Marathon trials. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, we've been asking so many guests like who you got on the team. We've been talking about it when we just have our banter podcast, and we're so high on Ethan Schuley right now. It's like not even funny. So yeah, Ethan Schuley's gonna make the team, guaranteed. Book it.
Love it.
I wanted to ask. So Danny went on Rory Linkletter and Jacob Thompson's podcast last week. They told him to bring a hot take, and he said the first time you run the Boston Marathon, you have to fun run it. Don't full send it. Take it in. Enjoy the crowds. You deserve it. You qualified after working hard to get there. Enjoy it. And I'm curious. And he got some people in the comments were like all with him, like absolutely, and then some absolutely flamed him. So I'm curious, what's your take on that? Is fun running the Boston Marathon okay?
Oh, see, this is a tough one because I've only ever done it once, and I never qualified. So when the first time I did it was, I had a friend of mine who worked at Adidas and was able to, get me a bib,
Nice.
and I wasn't even that far along into just sort of my, I was barely even thinking about doing all the majors. I just wanted to kind of check Chicago, New York, and Boston off the list. And it ended up being, I think my first sub 4 at that race.
Nice.
And I was very slow when I started. So for me that was a PR attempt, but also I guess now I look at it, I'm like you could have been fun running that time. Um, I it all depends. Uh, if you qualified, just barely got under the qualifying mark, and then the cutoff time, then I think like you could really give it a good effort to
Yeah.
push yourself even more. Um, if you think that your best days are now starting to go behind you, then for sure celebrate. And just enjoy the day. There are some people, I guess, like who I know who like make it a thing to go to Boston year over year, and sometimes it's sort of like if your talent
Yeah.
level aligns with sort of like being in a favorable age group,
Yep.
that can be a bit easier. So, yeah, I'm not opposed to people who fun run the Boston Marathon because it's very similar to the U.S. Olympic marathon trials, right? Where you
Yeah.
have so many people who exhaust themselves to qualify, and then they'll show up to the marathon trials and run, 10 to 20 minutes off of their personal bests. And because it was all about getting to that stage. And so, um, I wonder if the angry commenters, how they would feel about just sort of fun running the marathon trials, because in a way that race has got so much more prestige and is, the selection
Yeah.
race for the US Olympic team. And so, yeah, I'm not opposed to either one. I find it inspiring then when you also see, pregnant women running at the US Olympic
Yeah.
marathon trials, and so you get those sort of storylines as well. As long the the people who uh these marathons, I think, like, are just open to such a big range of talent. Like, there's the top professionals side of things that is going to run world class amazing times that will wow everybody. And then you've got people who are just trying to outrun the sweeper vehicles at the end, and they have really cool stories too.
Thank you to Qalo for sponsoring the podcast. We now have a 10% off link in the show notes for you to try your own Qalo Current Smart Ring. Marathon training is simple. Train to your fitness level, go easy on easy days, and push hard on hard days, and never skip your long runs. But how do you really know if you're getting the most out of it without a clear view of how your body's responding? That's where the Qalo Current Smart Ring comes in. Engineered by Qalo, the pioneer in silicone rings for hardworking, active lifestyles. I've been wearing my gold Qalo Current Slim Ring for about 6 months now during my training, and it gives me the clearest picture of my movement, vitality, and sleep compared to any other health tracking device I've tried. By focusing on these metrics, I can easily spot if I'm overtraining or nailing the right intensity for marathon prep. The app's sleek design turns all that data into something super digestible so I can tweak my training on the fly. Plus, for all the marathon moms out there, the Qalo app includes fertility tracking and stroller activities. Head to Qalo.com, that's Qalo.com to grab one. The Qalo Current Slim Ring is now available at Walmart.com and at select Walmart stores. That reminds me of a story from the LA Olympic Marathon Trials. Do you remember Chris
Chris
Barnacle, or
Barnacle.
do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, Danny, do you know this story?
No, what's the story?
So I just like pulled it up real quick. So the article that FlowTrack made is World's Fastest Stoner, Chris Barnacle talks after trials DNF. So he was like a great runner in college, like kind of snuck into the trials while he was still in great fitness. But then he, yeah, showed up to the race, hadn't run in a long time, donor, and just like still lined up and went for it and ended up DNFing. But pretty like funny story about just like someone completely unprepared to race. And I think on the Let's Run article they asked, they're like, "Are you high right now?" And he was like, he said like no comment or something. It was something like it ended funny like that. So yeah, kind of funny. Like it was like, what's this guy doing here? But he was a great runner in college and stuff. So
And
kind of
the
funny.
thing
Yeah,
is, it's like that's not causing any harm to the
No,
actual selection
great
that's
story.
taking place. It ends up being just
right.
really fun. So sometimes, yeah, the people who fun running are harmless. As long as you're not getting in anyone's way and impeding, a
Hmm.
lead runner or anything like that, then I think it's fine.
These guys
Totally.
got a. We have a friend that Danny and our other co-host Scotty ran with last year, and this it went viral on our Instagram page. The Our friend kissed this girl at Wellesley's, single guy, and it was like a pretty good smooch for sure.
It
And
was
they
like a
got
five
video.
second smooch. There was
Yeah, it
some
was
tongue.
good
Wow.
smooch. And they got 14 million views on Instagram. So very funny. It was
Did
a
anything
quality
come
video.
of it? Where, like, she must have been like, "What was his bib number? Look him up. At least you get a name." And so then it's sort of like on her to do some sort of outreach,
Yeah,
because to him, like, he's not stopping and getting her number in that moment. It's just the 5-second smooch.
We ended up finding her on Instagram because her
yeah.
friend tagged her in the post, and so I have a screenshot of it still, but she took the comment down, so it was clear that she did not wanna be found out.
Oh,
Yeah,
man, that's
we
unfortunate.
wanted to get her on the pod to, like, kinda tell her side of the
Yeah.
story, but didn't happen, so that
Try
was
and
great content, though.
set something up, little
You also gotta
matchmaker
wonder, like,
action.
how many married men also,
Yeah, yeah.
get in trouble, in that part of the Boston Melatonin course.
Yeah, yeah, I think, like, after COVID, people are a little more, like, hesitant, like, they
That's
just go with
true.
the high fives, you know? Chris, you mentioned, like, you were in Boston. You had, like, quite a journey to break 3 in the marathon, right?
By the
You
way,
didn't
I was at that race, the Houston
Yeah,
Marathon.
Houston.
Was it 2024,
Yeah,
23? Yeah. S
2024.
2024, I was there at the race. I remember you breaking it and seeing you post about it. It's really awesome.
so what was your marathon progression like, like, maybe, like, start to finish? Like, what did you run at first? And then what was, like, how did you finally get the breakthrough to break 3? Because we get so many emails, comments, like, "I'm trying to break 3 for a while. What kind of mileage should I hit?" All that stuff. So, I know you, like, said that was the first time you broke 4, so you came a long way, right, to break 3. So I'm curious, like, how you did it. I think that'd be really valuable to some people listening.
Yeah, so this is gonna be part of my upcoming book, I guess, that I've got coming out in 2027. So
Whoa,
that's in the
cool.
works right now. As of right now, it's called like the Marathon Book, and it encompasses like a lot of, marathon history. I'm working on a whole entire section that's like the 26 marathons that define American marathoning. And so I
Mm,
have the same publisher as Bill Simmons's book of basketball at Penguin Random House. And so when
nice.
I was approached for the idea, they actually asked me if I wanted to do a track book first. And then I said no, because with track and trying to do the same Simmonsy type of thing, it's just way too complicated. Too many events, too many world championships, too many Olympics that even like 700 pages doesn't do the
Yeah.
sport
Yeah.
justice. But I felt that the marathon definitely you can divide into eras. I've got this vantage point of having been to so many marathons as a writer, as a writer and reporter, as a fan, as a participant, and so I was like, I will do the marathon book. And, they went for it. And so at the same time, they were also, but we want your, personal story. Cause in a way, like that's, pretty relatable to a lot of people. And so I was a sprinter in high school. Funny enough, where like my best event was the 200. I ran 25-1, I believe it was,
That
as
is
my
amazing.
PR. And then what's that?
That is
Moving.
moving.
Yeah, and nowadays, like, I just got back from the track and, I was doing 200s. I'm trying to cram some fitness before we do this indoor marathon relay during Boston Marathon weekend, and,
Oh, yeah.
I was doing some 200s, and I looked down at one point, and I think I split, 31 on one of them, and I was like, "Alright, mission accomplished, check the box." I was like, "As long as I can run a 200 faster than my age, then I'm good," and it's only gonna hopefully get, easier, um so that was a good sign, but yeah, so I ran the 200, then I got into running just sort of for fun while I was in college. My first goal was to break 2 hours and a half marathon, and I did that. And, when I did that on my first try, I was like, "Okay, well, maybe that breaking 4 hours in a marathon is gonna be just as, fulfilling and easy in a way." So I signed up for New York, didn't get into New York, got into Chicago, and so my first marathon was 2013 Chicago Marathon. I was 19 years old at the time, and I, kind of go out there. I put in a training block. My high school coach was coaching me, and I ran, I think, like 4:17, 4:18. Um, it was a great day weather wise, and so the course is flat, conditions are awesome, and so it really just sort of was like I just didn't have it. So I was like, I'm gonna stick with this until I break 4. But I'd like to do it in New York, where that's I'm born and raised in New York City, hometown, try and do it there. But then I think I get hurt in the middle of the race in 20 when I run my first New York. It was like super cold one. I tried again, failed. Then I finally do it in Boston in 2016, And so that was my first sub 4, and I think it took 3 tries or third or fourth marathon. I'd have to look and see just sort of what my record was. Um, and
Mm.
then, after that, I think I kinda laid off, marathon running for a bit. I did just kind of, set a goal race. I think at one point, through the New York City running community, I picked up on just sort of how people were gonna go out to Berlin, for the 2017, I think it was, Berlin Marathon, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool." So, I was able to get a bib, and I go out and I
Nice.
run, I think it was like 3:37 or something like that. So big sort of like jump
Yeah.
there. And I caught the bug just running here with a bunch of other people. So for people who may not be as familiar, like the New York City running scene is just a whole nother animal. Like you've got like your clubs that are more, social for people just wanting to make friends and run with other folks. You've got and even like now, I guess post pandemic, like the dating run clubs that meet for singles and all that kind of stuff. And then also you
Really?
have like your groups that are more competitively driven. And so for me, that at the time was like the Brooklyn Track Club, and I'd go to track practice every Tuesday and Thursday. And then I would do, tempo runs and workouts. And I found community and people who were just as sort of, driven towards goals and pushing themselves. And so that made a major difference, I think, when I was then able to, drop in time to, well, I got my first marathon with the Brooklyn Track Club was like the London Marathon 2018, crazy, like record setting heat. I, cranked so badly, passed that at one point, but still made it to the finish in 3:59,
Look
crab
out
walked
style.
across the finish line. So my first true, just sort of like, fully healthy, good training block marathon with Brooklyn Track Club was 2019 Tokyo Marathon, and that was my 6 star. I ran
Nice.
3:16 there, went to Berlin, ran
Wow.
3:06. And so then
Wow.
when I'm taking these big chunks of time off, I start to get excited at like, all right, I can, get under 3 hours. And so it really was. I think the biggest factor was having people who were driven and would hold me accountable. I wasn't skipping any sort of long runs, and I made some of my best friends doing all of that as well. So it was rewarding in both those senses, the actual like physical sense and within the sport, and then also like the social side of things. And the pandemic hits, and like I think I laid off of really for the first part of it, I was doing virtual races and these time trials just like everyone
Yeah.
else was. Gosh, I mean, virtual races is a whole nother thing I haven't thought about in such a long time. Um,
They still
but
have them. You can believe it.
yeah, I guess
Yes, I
yeah,
still do.
they're still out there. Um, but yeah, so I had a tough time I think coming back off of the pandemic, and I didn't really um after a while I got burned out just from, what am I pushing myself for? And it took a while to get back into shape, but I had a great coach, Kate Gustafson, who was a really accomplished Canadian marathoner. She's still, competing, and she's I think run 240, 242 ish, somewhere in that range. And so she guided me through just sort of like that time of getting back into training, and went for it again. 2023 New York City Marathon, had an amazing sort of like training block, running all throughout that summer. And New York is a tough one where just sort of the
Yeah.
bridges and will not make it easy for you. For me, the unluckiest part of running New York has always been the Queensboro Bridge. Like it'll zap your legs at 16 miles. So that first half split is always sexy and like you feel good about yourself, but the work really begins at 15, 16 when you're getting over that Queensboro Bridge. And so if you don't have the legs coming off of First Avenue, then your race can kind of go to crap like pretty quickly after that. And so I suffered that, and I ended up finishing, I think, in 3:13, 3:17, something around that. And, I funny enough, I think like I was just writing about this for the chapter on it. I go back to my apartment and, I jump in the shower and My Tears Ricochet by Taylor Swift is like playing, and I'm having just like a major sad boy moment. And my wife comes home. She's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, like that, what was that all that for?" pretty disappointed. And I think on the cab ride over to like an after party that we were attending, I call my coach and she, was pretty pumped with the result, loved that I went for it. And then floats the idea as like, well, up to you. How do you feel about extending just sort of the training block and going to Houston? And I was like, all right, let's do it. And so, had to train through, the Thanksgiving and Christmas,
Yeah.
but Houston
That's
is,
true.
I think, the perfect marathon. From the
It's great.
standpoint of just you don't have to get on a ferry, at 3 o'clock,
Hmm.
4 o'clock in the morning, and then you sit around for a couple hours. It's not a crazy packed starting area. You just, I left my hotel room, I think, with like 45 minutes till the start of the race, got a solid warm up in, and then just went. And it was awesome. I think just sort of like hit that flow state, found some people who were also just sort of locked into, sub 3 pace. And um I just had it on the day. There were some hard parts toward the end. And, I think I found someone else who I knew who was having, I think, a little bit of a rough day and was shooting more for like 2:45. But she dropped back and like dragged me to, and held me on that sort of pace toward the end. And so when I posted that sort of like video clip immediately after of me just kind of going nuts at the finish line, that's where just sort of like all of those emotions, those shortcomings, just piled on. And so yeah, it was, I think, sort of an amazing day. And, I think my wife sacrificed a ton to kind of get to that point. I think I have another chapter that's dedicated to, I think it's called something like an appreciation of like the significant others who are waiting 3 hours for someone to come home from an 18 miler. Like it's a crazy long,
Yeah.
funny title. And at the same time, just sort of describes everything that that other person has to put up with. And so, yeah, so that was, I think, it's my best marathon to date. And it's hopefully, I'm hoping to try and pull a lot of different lessons from all of the different other marathons that I've run, to hopefully make it relate to people who also want to chase sort of like their goals.
Yeah, dude, what an epic like progression of marathoning. I think like you're right, like that story is so relatable. There's so many stories just like that. People trying to qualify for Boston, break three, and I think people sometimes get stuck in like a rut where like maybe they see professional or like elite running, and it's like that's not me. I'll never get there. But you need to like you know you need to set your own like be excited about your own goals and stuff like that. So like so for someone breaking three, like that should be everything for you if like that's what you're capable of. And that, yeah, so that's, I think so many people listening are gonna like really relate to that. So that's
And I
awesome.
think it's made
Thank
me
you for
better at my
sharing that.
job too, where just sort of
Yeah.
like that you have that relatability with the athletes when it comes to just sort of chasing whatever sort of goal that they may have. Like in the same similar vein, like after I checked that box off my bucket list, it was breaking 5 minutes in the mile. And that was also something that just sort of like I'd
Cool.
failed time and time again. Um, the most famous sort of failure is on YouTube with like 200,000 plus views where I challenged Malcolm Gladwell to a mile
Oh
race, and
yeah,
then I
that
ended
was
up
awesome.
crashing and burning and running like 5:20 something. Now, was I out of shape going into that? Yes. And then 2, was I, like, helping them get the live stream up and running maybe 10 minutes before the gun went off? Yes, also. So, like, I didn't have just sort of, like, the best sort of lead up into that race. And then I also learned that I don't do well when I, like, really put myself out there and, have the public fixated on just sort of like a goal.
Yep.
That's why
Hmm.
sort of Houston, I didn't really tell a whole lot of people,
Yeah.
that morning. I think Kyle was the first one to tweet the result and got it out there that I did it. And then, yeah, when I ended up breaking 5 minutes of the mile, it was at some, like, low key armory meet on, like, a Thursday or Saturday, whatever it was, and it wasn't, like, this big thing of, like, Chris is going for it. I just, went out there and sorta did it. So, I've learned that in the process as well, but it also just sort of, yeah, when there's that college kid who's trying to break 4 constantly, like, I know, and they fall short, I know what that's like. And then at the same time, I'm bringing the audience along for all of these different failures, and so when I break 3 in Houston, it goes nuts on social media, and at the same time, like, an American record was, like, broken on the same day
Yeah.
in the half
Yeah.
marathon, but more people seem to be invested in just sort of this schlub running 2:59, but it's cool to also have those moments, and again, that's sort of where we've separated ourselves a little bit within, the running media landscape of just sort of having that more personality driven side to our
Yeah.
content where you care about, how we inform people on news and all that stuff. But at the same time, it's who's delivering that also makes a difference. And, people, if Eric and Aisha choose to run a marathon, like people will want to know, how they do and they'll be tracked constantly. So that'll be fun, I guess. Like if they choose to do a marathon where like they later on reveal like who are the top 10 most tracked runners on the app or whatever it is,
Yeah.
I feel good about Eric and Aisha's popularity potentially getting them on there.
Are they
Totally.
doing a marathon?
They haven't announced any sort of plans, but we are floating some ideas of maybe this fall. We take a break from doing our little watch-alongs that we do on race day, and instead, as a group, line up together for a race.
Whoa, cool.
We'll do
Dude,
it. I
I
don't think it'll be like we're not gonna race each other because I think we're all at various different levels of fitness and retirement. So then I think it'll just be like, can we all fun run? I guess as Danny says, is like a marathon together, and hopefully
yeah.
that's a cool experience because we get to feed off of the energy of any supporters that we have along the course.
We've talked about doing a live podcast during like just like a smaller like marathon. It'd be kind of fun to do that. But you know what I love about Eric? He's kind of like the Theo Vaughn of track and field. Like you just never know what that guy's gonna say.
Yeah,
Um, the clip of him talking about he ran into like that famous actor on the airplane and
John
then
Malkovich.
posted,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, John Malkovich.
Malkovich.
And then like he went to the bathroom and he was like, long story short, he's like, I saw John Malkovich, using the restroom, whatever. He tweeted about it. John Malkovich has a, whatever. And like Alberto calls him and he's like, you got to take that down. And it's just like that
Yeah.
story. I was like crying, laughing, watching that clip. Eric's very funny. He's very
Eric's
funny.
filled with tons of stories like that, and I'm very happy that the show is thriving,
Yes.
and it's rapidly growing. I think like every single week, I look at the numbers, and I report them back to both of them. I'm like, you guys have something really special, and so they're doing their first live show in Boston, and that thing sold out within like a couple hours, and crazy long wait list right now, and so it's good. Yeah, I mean, they've found their footing, I think, in life post professional running.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's awesome that you give them, that opportunity to do something that they enjoy still, like, but still be in the running space, but not, being pro anymore. That's so awesome. So same with like Kyle, again, Mac Flea, after his career was over, he's still able to stay in the sport. So really cool.
Yeah, we definitely
Um,
have a thing for former professional runners
yeah,
joining
yeah,
our fold, but at the same time, like I do pay attention to see like who are some really creative people doing things and studying journalism or communications, whatever it might be, and so that's part of the job is just sort of like trying to keep your finger on the pulse of how people consume media and
Mm.
news. Where like I sometimes feel like all right, most people are learning about something like the marathon world championships via Citius's Instagram. And so in our caption, can we give them enough that like they feel good knowing what the news is? And then that, I treat an Instagram post almost in the same way as an article on a website, right? Where more people are probably going to see that Instagram post than read
Mhm.
an article on, Let's Run or on
yeah.
runnersworld.com or whatever it might be. So that's sort of, it's always getting creative with how we present news, commentary, analysis, all that kind of stuff.
You guys are definitely like the main news source for people like on Instagram when Connor Mance drops out of the Boston Marathon or something major happens like that. It's like every time we talk about it, like on this pod or like ever when we see the news initially, it's always on Citius Mag. So yeah, you guys are the breaking news source these days. It's
That's
awesome.
my background, I guess, from SI. I was quarterback the whole entire team that where for a while, I guess like to give some context on it, would be like, for example, Tom Brady snaps his leg in the middle of like the fourth quarter of a football game. It was on me to then, spot it, as it's happening live. I'm either watching the game or I see it pop up on Twitter, and then I drop it into our team's, channel. And then I'm like, hey, who's on it? Someone will, instantly get on it. They'll write 200 words. We'll all edit it. And then it goes live on our site. Then we update it constantly with more information. And so that was the fast paced, nature
Oof.
of the Sports Illustrated newsroom. And
Yeah.
I've kind of kept that sort of same approach to when it comes to, a bunch of track and running news. And so,
Mm.
yeah, it is really cool. Now, just sort of the yeah, I wanna develop an app that's kinda like our next sort of, frontier.
Cool.
I think that's what we're sort of looking at, because we just don't really have some good places to talk about, um, track as much, right? Like, Twitter isn't the same as it was back in, like, 2014, where you'd be able to refresh a diamond like, constantly as a diamond league is taking place and people are tweeting splits and all that kinda
Yeah.
stuff or reacting to
Yeah.
things. Um, and Let's Run, the message boards can get a little toxic at times, and so you don't wanna just kinda crawl in the mud too much.
Yeah.
So there isn't like that great alternative. People have tried to move over to Blue Sky or Threads. I don't necessarily think that those have been working necessarily. So I kind of want to test the waters and see what an app would look like. And then at the same time, like think about just sort of like, for example, when Grant Fisher leaves the Bowerman Track Club, right? Like that was like
Yeah.
a when you
Big
got that
news.
news, you're just like, oh wow, like oh my gosh, and you text 4 or 5 friends the links to the Citius Instagram post or whatever it is, where however you found out the news, and it doesn't have the same sort of effect as like the Sports Center app that when something happens, Tiger Woods, another DWI happens, everyone's learning that from the ESPN, notification that blasts onto people's
Mm,
phones.
Yeah.
yeah.
So my thought process is, what if we develop the app that then all of a sudden it's like, all right, Grant Fisher leaves the Bowerman Track Club. Anyone on the Citius app gets that sort of news right away, and then we foster sort of the conversation that's taking place there. So that's sort of like my sort of next
Mm.
idea and venture that we've already started the process of developing. And so, we'll see where it goes.
Dude, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I think Track World needs that. So, dude, I'll be your first subscriber or first
Yeah, we'll
downloader.
have you
So
beta test it for us. Yeah, yeah.
I'll beta test. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
no problem.
totally.
Dude, yeah, Danny's a developer, man. He'll beta test that thing, no problem.
I use
Amazing.
that
Yeah.
stuff all the time. That's yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Danny works for Smart Ring company. They have a
Oh, cool.
great app. So yeah, really cool. Oh, no, it's on this hand. Yeah, there you go. But Danny, do you have anything else for Chris before you let him go, man?
Yeah, Chris. So what are some of your top favorite running books? You're writing one right now. Your background's in journalism. What are you reading that really is interesting? Maybe a new perspective on the sport, or just a biography that you really like.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm looking at they're all sitting on my desk right now, just like right next to me. Penny Moore, I think, is one of the greatest track writers ever. So he's got like a compilation of like his best Sports Illustrated stories called Best Efforts. I think that's always just one of the best ones. It's not necessarily like one story cover to cover. So I always recommend Best Efforts to people. Um, I love I love The Duel in the Sun. That one was a good one. That one tells the story of
Yes. Yes.
1982 Boston Marathon, Alberto Salazar, Dick Beardsley. So I've got a whole chapter on that in my book. And I talked to Dick Beardsley a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. I think I might catch him in Boston as well. Um,
That's awesome.
because I think his life has also taken some crazy turns since that race. So love Duel in the Sun. Beb's 26 marathons is a great, easy, good read. Especially because I was there for a lot of the moments post, I think 2012. So that was really cool to reflect on. So I think those are, oh, and then Nick Thompson's The Running Ground, which just came out a couple months ago.
I'm reading
Um,
that right now.
ah,
Do
Are you
you
really?
do you train with him at the Brooklyn Track Club? Because I've seen him in singlets at Brooklyn Track Club.
Yeah, so I think Nick is part of the Brooklyn Track Club. I don't think he attends too many of the workouts, and
Mm.
he was coached by and is coached, I think, by Steve Finley, who coached me for a
Yep.
while. I'm no longer in the Brooklyn Track Club. I think I left that team in 2020, moved over to the Central Park Track Club, did that for a bit, and now actually we're just running kind of independently with the Citius Mag Run Club, which has just started out in New York City. So we got a
Nice.
little New York City
Oh,
chapter
wow.
of like sub elite runners that we're a couple months in, and so we're starting to pop up, I think, on the New York Roadrunners results. But no, I know Nick, and I had him on the podcast about a year ago at this time, and um, it was fantastic. I think so. I think maybe one of my favorite running books, all things considered. Just
Yeah,
it's more than just about running. Like it's a
for
lot
sure.
of it is on life. And
Hmm.
I think when I put the book down and finished it, I was like, I got to call my dad. And so it's like
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
one of those really heartfelt. There's so many different lessons you could take from it, but also some good vignettes and portraits of some other really cool folks in the running space. Like I think there's Bobby Gibb, who was the first
Hmm.
woman to run the Boston Marathon. She's got like a chapter or two in there. And yeah, so I
He has a
recommend the
chapter
Runner's
called
Run for sure. Yeah,
Beet
yeah, yeah.
Juice about just training hard, and he talks about his mom in that chapter, and yeah, just like chapters about kind of different vignettes is a good way to describe it. It's not like a linear story of running, but like how running kind of intertwines itself throughout parts of his life, and yeah, I thought it was really cool broken up that way.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I think
Mhm.
when after I read it, in November, that was, like, kind of around New York City Marathon time, I, one, immediately started thinking, I was like, "Well, now how the hell am I gonna write a running book?" Like, he did such an amazing job of sort of
Yeah.
describing what it's like to run so many of these, great races, whether it's Chicago or New York, and then 2, I was inspired by it, and then you couple that with just sort of, like, the general excitement of seeing so many of your friends accomplish goals and watching the marathon up close. So for me, from November up until, I think it's still kind of going strong, and I'm waiting for this next sort of wave of inspiration that's going to come after Boston to really put the final touches on my own sort of book. It's due in June to the editors, and then it kind of goes through this whole process of editing. And yeah, so I mean, I think that's what happens for a whole year or so before it finally goes to market in 2027. So it's been a different experience for me, um, and something new. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Like, I'm having a lot of fun, and so yeah, that's something that's coming down the pipeline for sure.
Wow.
Can't
You
wait
are,
to
yeah.
God, get me on the pre-order list. I'll give you my email, but I can't wait to read it, man. That's
I'll
gonna be
have to come
awesome.
back on to just plug it at some point
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
Oh, dude, yeah, we would love that. Yeah, that we would love that. This has been such you can tell you're a podcaster. You're very like well spoken for sure on the pod and stuff. So yeah,
it's
you
his
can tell
job.
you're a podcaster. So that yeah, this was awesome, man. We were so excited when you said you'd come on. So we really appreciate it, your time, and thank you for all you do for the sport. You've like I feel like you're one of the biggest positive influencers in the sport in the U.S. So yeah,
No, thanks,
thank you.
man, and thanks to you guys for having me on. I've got so many episodes to catch up on from your guys' archive. I think we were saying before we started recording, I was like, I looked and just saw just sort of a bunch of different episodes that you guys have, and you're doing some great work. Love that you've leaned in full time. It's not easy. It's a little daunting at times, but you got to just keep at it, and you never know, I think, how it can snowball.
I found out my first kid was on the way 2 weeks after I quit my job. So it's great. Yeah. I was like, well, this has to work now. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's great. But all right, Chris Chavez, Life and Stride podcast. We'll catch you on the next one. See ya, dude.